All right, ready to dive into something fascinating.
Always up for a good deep dive. What are we tackling today?
We're going way back in time to explore the history of political systems.
Sounds ambitious. Where are we starting?
From the very beginning, how those early humans went from, well, figuring things out, to the complex states we live in today.
The classic tale of order from chaos. What's our guidebook for this historical odyssey?
Francis Fukuyama's The Origins of Political Order. It's full of surprises.
I'm intrigued already. Fukuyama always brings a unique perspective.
He definitely challenges some assumptions. For instance, we're kicking things off with our closest relatives, chimpanzees.
Chimps. I'm not sure I see the connection to political systems just yet.
It's all about their social dynamics, those power struggles and alliances. It actually offers a fascinating glimpse into our own evolutionary past.
So by observing chimps, we get a peek into those primal instincts for power and hierarchy that might be hardwired into us humans.
Exactly. It's like looking into a distorted mirror reflecting our own deep past.
Okay, you've piqued my curiosity. So how do those chimp power dynamics relate to those early human societies?
Well, think about it. Early human societies relied heavily on kinship, those intricate family ties. Your bloodline, your clan, it determined your place in society, your access to resources, everything.
It's like Game of Thrones, but less dragons, more cousins.
Exactly. But you can imagine a system purely based on who's related to whom probably had its limits, right?
Oh, absolutely, especially as those groups grew larger and encountered new challenges. Imagine trying to resolve a dispute or make a decision that impacts hundreds, even thousands, based solely on familial hierarchies.
A recipe for disaster.
Chaos. It was simply unsustainable for large, complex societies. They lacked the mechanisms for large-scale organization and struggled to adapt.
So how did we bridge that gap? How did we go from these smaller, family-focused groups to the larger, more intricate systems that characterize states?
That's where things take a fascinating turn. The emergence of the state. It marks a profound shift in human social organization.
So it's not just about a leader.
Not just any leader, it's the development of centralized power. The ability to enforce rules, laws, over a defined territory.
Okay, starting to sound a little more familiar, but I'm guessing it's more nuanced than that.
Much more. It's the ability to do all that with a level of legitimacy that transcends those old blood ties.
Legitimacy, that feels important. So we're not just talking about brute force here.
Precisely. Legitimacy is the lifeblood of a state. It's the difference between raw power and actual authority that people are willing, to some degree, to obey.
So how does a state earn that legitimacy?
That's the question, isn't it? And one of the most potent catalysts, and this might surprise you, was war.
War. You'd think conflict would tear people apart, not bring them together.
And yet, history shows us a different story. Think about ancient China during the Warring States period. It was chaotic, brutal, but also a period of intense competition and innovation.
So war, as terrible as it is, forced these societies to evolve.
To survive, the states that thrived weren't just the biggest or the strongest, but those who adapted most effectively. Think of it as a high-stakes game of civilization building, and the stakes couldn't have been higher.
That's an intense way to put it. But intriguing. Can you give us an example of what set the winners apart?
Let's take the state of Qin, for example. They revolutionized warfare. They dismantled the old aristocratic armies, where your lineage mattered more than your skill.
Right, clinging to tradition.
Exactly. They replaced that entire system with a meritocratic one, meaning even a peasant, someone from nothing, could rise through the ranks based on their skill, their courage on the battlefield.
That's a radical departure. So they were essentially saying bye-bye to the old rules and creating a system where talent trumped lineage. Bold move.
It paid off, and it wasn't just about military might. The Qin implemented radical reforms, land redistribution, for example, weakening those old aristocratic families who held all the power.
So war, while brutal, forced these societies to evolve, adapt, innovate to survive. But what happens when these powerful states become a bit too powerful? That's something we'll have to unpack. We've seen how these states emerge from conflict, wielding power and legitimacy, but what happens when that power goes unchecked?
It's a slippery slope, isn't it? Fukuyama certainly doesn't shy away from that darker side of political development.
It's like the old saying, power corrupts.
And absolute power corrupts, absolutely.
Exactly. So it's not just about a state being strong or weak.
Right. It's how that strength is used, and more importantly, who it serves.
So how does a state go bad?
Well, Fukuyama outlines two main ways. First, They become ineffective, paralyzed, unable to do what states are supposed to do.
Failing to serve their people.
Exactly. Imagine a government so bogged down by bureaucracy, so beholden to special interests.
Or just stuck in the past, clinging to outdated rules.
All of that. To the point where it's incapable of addressing the needs of its people.
Or even defending itself.
Exactly. They become sitting ducks.
Is there a historical example that illustrates this kind of decline?
The Ming Dynasty in 17th century China is a perfect example.
Weren't they a powerful empire?
They were, but they faced a serious threat from the Manchus to the north.
And it was their own internal struggles that held them back.
Precisely. Power struggles, corruption, stifling bureaucracy.
Wow, a cautionary tale for sure. But you mentioned a second way states can go bad.
Yes, and this is the scarier one. Instead of becoming weak and ineffective, they swing to the other extreme.
Becoming tyrannical.
Exactly. Instruments of oppression. Imagine living under a regime that controls every aspect of your life.
Your movements, your words, even your thoughts?
Everything. Dissent is silenced, individuality crushed. Fear becomes the primary tool of governance.
Chilling. And unfortunately, history is full of those examples.
It's a recurring nightmare, isn't it?
It makes you wonder, are we destined to repeat these cycles?
That's the million-dollar question. Are powerful states doomed to become either ineffective or tyrannical?
Is there another way?
Maybe. Fukuyama points to Europe as a potential counterexample.
Europe. Weren't they late bloomers when it came to building strong states?
That's what makes them so interesting. While other parts of the world were consolidating power under huge empires, Europe remained fragmented.
A patchwork of kingdoms, duchies, cities, all vying for power.
Exactly. A recipe for chaos, you might think.
So while other parts of the world were striving for unification and centralized control, Europe was a hot mess of competing powers. It sounds more like a recipe for chaos than a blueprint for success. How did this fragmented system actually lay the groundwork for greater freedom and accountability?
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
This fragmentation, this constant struggle for power and influence, it actually prevented any single ruler from becoming all-powerful.
They kept each other in check.
Precisely. Kings had to contend with the church, powerful nobles, the rising merchant class in the cities,
All these different factions with their own agendas.
each with their own power bases, and they weren't afraid to challenge the throne.
So instead of a single all-powerful state, you had this dynamic system of checks and balances almost by accident.
You could say that. And this constant need to negotiate, to make concessions, it forced European rulers to govern with at least some degree of consent from the governed.
Interesting. So it was less about brute force and more about finding compromise.
Exactly. They had to grant certain rights, uphold legal traditions.
And start listening to the people they ruled.
Well, at least consulting with them. Representative assemblies began to emerge, giving a voice to those outside the traditional circles of power.
Okay, so Europe's decentralized, messy political landscape, born more out of circumstance than grand design, actually set the stage for things like the rule of law and accountable governance.
Concepts we often take for granted today.
Absolutely. It's a powerful reminder that the path to a better future isn't always a straight line. Sometimes a little bit of messiness can be a good thing. But how does all this ancient history, this deep dive into the origins of political order, connect to our world today? Why should we care about what happened centuries, even millennia ago?
Because the more things change, the more they stay the same, right? Those historical patterns, those fundamental challenges of political order, they're still relevant today.
We're still grappling with many of the same questions about power, legitimacy, the relationship between the individual and the state.
Exactly. And understanding those historical roots, those enduring patterns, it gives you a powerful lens through which to view the complexities of the 21st century.
So whether we're trying to make sense of global politics or just understand the dynamics at play in our own workplaces, this deep dive into political order gives us a framework for understanding these age-old issues.
It's about connecting those historical dots, recognizing that the institutions and ideas we often take for granted are products of long and often tumultuous historical processes.
And Fukuyama takes it a step further with a pretty provocative idea. He argues that even the things we consider quintessentially modern, like the rule of law, have deep roots in ancient ideas about religion and social order.
It's an often overlooked connection. He suggests that those early systems of belief, those codes of conduct that emerged from religious traditions, they shaped our understanding of right and wrong, of justice and fairness, long before modern legal systems existed.
So it's not just about understanding how political systems evolved, it's also about recognizing the influence of these deeper cultural currents, those enduring moral and philosophical traditions that continue to shape our world.
Traditions that we might not even realize are influencing us. It makes you wonder, what else are we missing? What other insights from the past might hold the key to solving the problems of the present?
That's something to ponder, isn't it? And it's the beauty of these deep dives. They're not just about unearthing fascinating historical insights, they're about giving you, the listener, the knowledge and the perspectives to navigate the complexities of our world.
To approach those big questions with a renewed sense of curiosity and maybe even a bit of wisdom from the past.
And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the origins of political order. We'll see you next time.